Okay, thank you for coming tonight. I just want to remind, is it on? Yeah. I just want to remind everyone that we are being taped, and possibly even live, but we definitely are being taped by ActonTV. I know that we wanted to get started with a group of community members who contacted me and asked for a little bit of extra time to get up and present their thoughts regarding the next steps process. So we are going to allow that. We're going to start off with that. So if someone wants to come up from that group. Well, we're going to, but we will, then we're going to have to move on to the discussion of interim and permanent. And yeah, because we need to move into the discussion, and I know you wanted to make a statement before that.
Okay. My name is Alan M.G.L. I live on Marion Road, and I'd like to read a letter that this community group wrote in the last couple days to address the issue that we're all here today for, which is the starting up a new search process for the superintendent. Dear School Committee, we represent a group of ACTON-BOXBOROUGH residents who share the goal of hiring the best possible superintendent for our school system. Some of us remain in a sort of grieving process as we're still trying to come to terms with the reality that we as a district will be separating from our current superintendent for reasons we still do not understand, even though many of us appreciated his service and supported his initiatives as we understood them. Thank you. Therefore, given the unfortunate circumstances in which we find ourselves, there is an issue of trust that needs to be restored between our hardworking school committee and the members of the community that committee serves. We certainly do not purport to speak for everyone, but to the extent we do not, we hope that our own voice will also continue to enable others to be heard as well. In fact, our actions to date have largely been directed precisely to that important end, to request that the school committee change its meeting agendas to give greater voice to the community, and not just to the dominant voices in our group, but to all of those concerned about these recent events, whether they agree with us or not. At this point, we have developed some very specific requests related to the next steps in the process of seeing new superintendent leadership for our school district. We hope the school committee and others in our community will understand that our primary goal in making these specific requests to the school committee and in making these requests public is to help to stimulate further constructive debate on these important issues so that the entire community may work with the school committee to repair the broken trust both internally and externally, and to make it clear to prospective candidates that the prior divisive issues are behind us and that we are moving forward as one community. We believe that the strong consideration and hopefully acceptance and implementation of the following recommendations by the school committee will be critical in attracting top candidates. 1, we want the school committee to appoint an interim superintendent as soon as possible. The interim should serve until a permanent superintendent is hired and takes over, which we assume will be starting July 1st, 2018. A person serving either as acting or interim superintendent for an extended period would not be eligible for the permanent position. 2, the last search resulted in the selection of a superintendent who only served for 3 years and is leaving rather abruptly as a result of reported philosophical differences between him and the current school committee. Given this fact alone, we believe that changes to the search process are necessary to make it more likely to be successful in both attracting and retaining our new superintendent. We respectfully request that the school committee implement the following guidelines or rules. A, if possible, the 2017-2018 search committee should be comprised of individuals who have not yet served on any AB superintendent search committee. B, half or more of the search committee shall be volunteers from the AB community, including parents of children currently in the AB schools, as well as other community members, who do not have any current or prior affiliation to the school district as employees, either paid or unpaid special employees such as school committee members. C, the chair or vice chair of the search committee shall represent the community as one of the volunteers from the AB community as described in B above. 3, the school committee shall develop a conflict of interest policy which shall include the prohibition of participating in the discussion or voting to recommend a candidate when candidates are still under consideration who are personal friends of the member. This policy shall apply to discussion and voting on such issues both by and within the search committee and the school committee. 4, for a robust national search for the new superintendent, we prefer that a new consulting search firm be selected. 5, the criteria for the permanent superintendent, including the stated qualifications, both of credentials and experience, that shall be advertised for the position once posted, shall first be discussed in open public meetings of the school committee or search committee. Such criteria shall include a consideration and discussion of expectations for the candidate's educational philosophy, both substantive and operational, as it relates to the philosophy of the school committee and the school district. 6, following the open public meetings of the school committee or search committee, as described in paragraph 5 above, there shall be at least one public forum devoted to the issues as stated in paragraph 5, which shall be attended by members of the search and school committees, along with the representative of any search firm that is to be hired. This public forum should give the communities of Acton and Boxborough a chance to engage and give direct and public feedback on the precise criteria and qualifications and philosophical expectations of any candidates for the new position. And 7, given the importance of getting and retaining the best candidates, the school committee should be willing to offer a more attractive compensation package to the new superintendent. We look forward to your careful attention in response to this letter, and it's signed by 6 people: Sushri Anuradha of Acton, Alan Nitcham of Acton, Steve Ballard of Boxborough, Sanjeev Biswa of Acton, Sunanda Papalia of Acton, and Charlie Cadillac of Acton. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess I'm going to ask the, well, my suggestion would be that we go and start our discussion about how we go about choosing the interim superintendent, how we want to do it. Do we want to do, does the committee want to consider an internal candidate? Does the committee want to consider an external candidate? And what kinds of guidelines and what are the next steps that the committee is looking to do? I'm just going to open it up for discussion.
I'm sorry, Amy, I thought we were going to talk about interim versus permanent first.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Sure, then let's have that discussion first. I guess that's crucial. So what does the committee feel about, what is opening up discussion interim versus permanent? Yep. Oh, sorry, that's okay.
So I think we need to find an interim superintendent. My preference would be somebody from the outside, if we can find someone who's qualified and who'd be interested, at least on a part-time basis, to help provide support to the central office staff. We have in our packets a description of the central office staff in terms of the current deputy superintendent and the 2 assistant superintendents. So they can certainly help, you know, fill in on issues when they come up, but as we can all see from their job descriptions, they all have a full plate of daily responsibilities as well. So my preference would be to try to find somebody from the outside to fill in, to help with issues when they come up, help with budget, the things that aren't necessarily as meaty in terms of this district or specific in terms of this district. So that's one suggestion.
I agree. I don't think if we try and hold off for a superintendent, I think that process would just take too long, and I feel like we'd be rushed to have a superintendent. I think an interim is the best choice, And again, with Bridget, I was going to just say, they don't, we have the people that are here that handle the issues that know the district, and the person that's coming in is a fill-in for the stuff that they can fill in and take the load off of, our assistants and deputy superintendents in the meantime, so.
So I remember we talked about this a little bit in one of our previous meetings, and this issue came up where there was some, I can't remember who had some names in mind. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Has that gone anywhere? Do we have a list of names that might?
I think we were waiting to get a general, a clear charge from the committee before we actually reached out to people. So I'm hoping that tonight we can actually get a clear charge of exactly what you want us to do.
I agree with what Bridget said. If we can find the right person and find a good fit. So I would say I'd recommend going down that path quickly. And if we find a good person, to move ahead. And if we're not comfortable with who applies or who we find, then perhaps we have to revisit it.
So I concur with what's been said. I think the search for an interim is appropriate. And I'm also remembering Christina's comment in the May 30th meeting that that we need to time this so we are, for the permanent search, so we are capturing the best and greatest number of candidates.
So I do think this interim position, it really depends on who we get. I'm sorry. The interim position, I think, really depends on who we get. So what I'm thinking about now is that I'm on board with an interim, but I think that when I heard that there are some candidates that are in mind that know the district and could kind of fit in, hit the ground running, I'd like to flesh that out. But I also want to have a backstop in case we don't find anyone who's willing, that we feel is the appropriate person to serve as interim. And then I think we need to be ready to switch gears.
I think I heard everybody said, and we discussed that when we were in junior high library. I have no problem to accept whether we search interim superintendent first, or we probably do not have, I don't know, maybe we end up with, because there are just how many days, 10 days left? Okay, so we must have someone. We have acting superintendent anyways, right? So my suggestion is, just like what I said before, I think the most important thing is we need to have our search committee right away. No matter this is not hiring season or not, we need to form our committee, try to track the best superintendent position as soon as possible.
So I just want to make sure I understood. So you think that we should get together a permanent, the search committee for the permanent position and get that started right now? Or are you saying we need to get the interim position, or maybe both, right now?
Yeah, I'm saying maybe both.
So the process for selecting an interim, I envision, is different, obviously, than selecting permanent. Do we need a search committee for an interim, or is this something that we get a list of names and we go down the list and find someone who says yes?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, never having searched for an interim superintendent before, I think we'd probably need a subcommittee to work on that search process. I think there are some people who have ideas as to certain individuals that might be appropriate to reach out to. It's not the time tonight to mention people by name, but I think we'd need a subcommittee of the school committee to take that on, to do a search, and, you know, however we decide we want to make up that committee. If it's committee members and we think that's enough, that's fine. If we want to invite others from the public to help with that process, but I think it needs to be a, you know, fairly quick process, and certainly isn't going to be a year-long search to find, I would hope, to find an interim superintendent. So I think it would probably be abbreviated.
Oh, okay, well, and I mean, timing is critical. I mean, we need someone quickly. So I'm okay with just having a subcommittee with a fairly abridged system or process, and because I'm going to presume that the names that are under consideration are well qualified, so I think we might be able to do away with some of those formalities. So my hope is that if we are to form a subcommittee to consider interim candidates, that process flushes out fairly quickly in the next, you know, couple of weeks maybe.
I only have one question, which is, you know, as we say we're going to hire, you know, we're going to look into an interim, and I know this goes into the next steps of looking for the interim, but how rigid are we going to be with, you know, so we have all these steps, I know what you just said, we have all these steps that we use to find the superintendent, right, and to set the criteria of that superintendent. Are we, and I guess this is what the subcommittee's going to have to decide, whatever, you're going to use an old version of just trying to get, you know, either use Steve Mills or, you know, so Dr. Mills or Dr. Brand's version. I'm just wondering, you know, is that
So-
all that going to be part of that process?
I think for the interim, so you're suggesting that we have are you talking about for the permanent position, establishing the criteria, or criteria, excuse me, or you mean or you're talking about for the interim, we need to establish some kind of a criteria as a committee? Yep, agreed.
So it sounds like the committee is on board with looking for an interim superintendent. It sounds like the committee is on board with looking for an external candidate, if we can find one. So we'd need people to volunteer to take on that process. And then I think the school committee needs to talk about what the criteria are. And we've got a lot of resources in our packet to do that. Does that make sense?
Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have any other thoughts? Eileen?
So our conclusion is we're looking for external candidate for the interim position. So why not internal?
That we can have that discussion. I didn't hear anyone bring that up, so if someone wants to talk about that, that's fine.
So by default, Marie is the deputy superintendent, so on July 1, by default, if we don't have an interim, she, in my view, and maybe that's up for discussion, but in my view, by default, that's why we organized or restructured those positions to have a clear second in command, and it just, in my view, by default, on July 1, Marie takes over for however long it takes us to get an interim. I feel comforted for that because I think Marie understands the district, and it gives us a luxury of time, so we're not tripping over our feet to find the interim.
Are there any other thoughts on that, or, Eileen, do you want to respond to that? Do you want to, I've only heard from you so far
yeah.
that you think that we should look for an interim.
No. I mean, I just heard saying we will have external candidate for interim position, but what my concern, it's not concern. I think the time is like, July 1st will be very soon here, right? So it doesn't matter internal or, external, whenever or wherever or whoever we find is a good candidate, we should use it. We should, the interim superintendent, right? If we cannot find anyone, I don't mind it's internal or external. If we can't find anyone, Marie will be the acting superintendent anyways. So my concern is I really worry about the process down the road, and that's the thing we should really work on. It's not like the transition is really important, I agree, but so our real job, it's not like every job is real job, but it's, focus is down the road. We should really form some good guidelines for our future search. And I think that can happen at the same time, but I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I think I agree with you. Go ahead.
So I'm just wondering when our next meeting would be, because I'm thinking that's quite a way. After Thursday. So the next meeting that would reasonably be expected that we would accept an interim candidate. That's not until July. And that's the workshop.
That's the
So
workshop.
We may need a meeting, we may need to call
Right.
a meeting sooner than that.
Right, right.
I'm willing to help out with identifying an interim superintendent, so I'll help do that. And I know we need to put some structure around what, the criteria and that kind of stuff, so I'm happy to help with that.
Anyone else? Yep, Diane?
So I'm just, two things. I'm more than happy to serve on that subcommittee, number one. But two, so item 7 requires a vote just for interim versus permanent. So should we take care of that before we talk internal, external?
If you would feel more comfortable, we can do it that way.
We could also vote to establish a subcommittee and charge them with the task of finding an external interim candidate once we narrow it down to that point, right? So it doesn't have to be 3 votes necessarily.
And I agree with Katie because I think, we can go down this path and assume that we want to find an external interim and hope that we are able to find someone who knows the district, who would be a good fit. And if we don't, and we haven't voted on these separately, then I think it will be easier to take the next step.
I only have 2 people so far, Paul and Diane. Oh, you did, okay, that's what I was asking. Okay, so you're volunteering to sit on this?
Sorry, I thought you were asking.
No.
Never mind.
All right, so you're volunteering to sit in that subcommittee? Okay, and then Tessa. All right.
So item 5 is discussion of interim superintendent versus permanent superintendent, and I don't view these as mutually exclusive because at some point we do want a permanent superintendent. So the idea is that what we would be voting on is really superintendent, interim or not. Right. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong agenda. Okay, that helps. Number 7, thank you. Yeah, okay, so Right, so I just want to make sure that, when we vote on this, it's really for what I think it is. So I'm on board for an interim superintendent to give us time to look for a good, solid, permanent candidate.
Yep, Tessa?
So if we're voting on interim, does that mean that we are deciding to not start the search for the permanent superintendent immediately?
Yeah, well, from my understanding and my conversations with people who have done this before, the time to start a search for a candidate is in September. And to do it now, you're just not going to get the pool, you're just not going to get a wide net pool of candidates. So you really, the timing is really important.
I
So-
agree, I just wanted to make sure that that's what everyone understood that we were voting.
That being said, I don't think there's anything that would hold us back, except for bandwidth, frankly, from starting the process, finding out who's interested in serving on the committee that would look for this superintendent, starting to get together materials, putting together a schedule, you know, some of the preliminary stuff, but not advertising the position until later. I mean, that's always an option. But then you run into summer schedules and people are away and all of that stuff too. So,
And my concern with asking for volunteers over the summer is people miss those emails, right? People check out, and not that, I mean, I think people are more aware of what's going on now, but I think people do tend to check out where in September, everyone's back in the system, and when we start looking for committee members, they're more engrossed and paying attention to the emails or advertisements going out.
I disagree. I think more people are probably paying attention right now than they will 3 months from now. I think. Right, but I think if we can start now to gather materials, I think that's wise. If we have people who are willing to do it and use their summertime, that doesn't preclude, one process does not preclude the other.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we should take a vote to establish the subcommittee to look for an interim candidate, an interim superintendent, and then we'll follow, just do the next discussion after that. So can I have a motion?
So moved?
Okay, all those in favor? Oh,
before we vote, can I just make sure I know what we're voting on? So we're voting to nominate Paul, Deanne, Diane, and Tessa to serve on the subcommittee to look for an interim superintendent. Is
to
that correct?
establish a subcommittee and that these 4 individuals would be on that subcommittee.
Okay.
Yes, Eileen. Oh, okay,
The quorum is 4 Acton and 2 Boxborough.
Yep.
okay, yep, great. Eileen.
Okay, so we already had a motion, so we need to amend the motion to add Eileen.
Somebody like to amend the motion?
So amended.
And the second was happy, okay.
All right, any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. All right, so I guess the question now is that subcommittee, would you like to work on getting the criteria and establishing how you want to proceed to search for that interim, or would you like some direction? Are you looking for direction from the committee for that? How does the committee feel about that?
I'm just looking for the quickest way to get this done. Because I would hate to say that we have to have another committee meeting to just get that underway. So I guess I'm shooting from the hip here, and I'm ready to just do what we need to do to get a list of names that we could put forward to the committee as soon as we can. So I don't know, maybe we plan to get together in the next week to come up with some criteria that we feel are important to for the person that we need to serve as the interim. And then it's a matter of contacting to see if they're interested. But I envision in maybe 2 weeks, us coming to the committee with some candidates that we can choose.
I do think I'm sorry, one second. I do think we have to have a discussion about what was brought up this evening regarding whether the interim could then apply for the permanent position. So I would like the committee's feedback on that.
Okay, so it makes sense that if someone's sitting here for a full year, that they would have a leg up in the pool of candidates. So I would rather not have the interim be allowed to also apply for superintendency. That may discourage, it may not, but it may, and I think to maximize our process here and what we're aiming for, I think that's an important step to take. So, your thoughts?
I wonder if because we're looking for an external candidate, it's less important that they not be allowed to then apply. I understand the perception of an internal candidate then being a shoo-in could deter others, but nobody knows who has applied in a superintendent search process, and until we get to the 3 finalists. And having an external candidate, if he or she winds up being awesome, I would hate to lose them as an option entirely.
So I remember at the last meeting I had commented that how nervous I would be to have the interim being able to apply to the job. But the more and more I think about it, and I still, so it's very conflicting, because if we get someone young as the interim, then we could be, we could have this awesome person, and now we've limited ourselves and said, well, you can't apply, and, now I feel like, oh, gosh, we just lost out on this great opportunity. But if we look more, and I guess, if we look at the interim and try and say, well, maybe we should look at retired superintendents, then we don't have the issue of that person, because they're retired, they're not coming back in. So that's where, I'm kind of like, if our interim is a retired superintendent, then we have no issue. But if they're really young, and they're awesome, we've just lost out on a great potential candidate, because from what we learned in our last search, it's not, and the way you get years of service and all of that in regards to a town employee, you don't tend to switch states because you lose a great deal of benefits. It's very rare, from what I understood with superintendents, that people switch states. So it is someone that's more local to Massachusetts. So again, I'm just very concerned if we totally limit it. I want to get the best candidate possible. I'd rather look at the interim as a retired superintendent and then not have to deal with any of that.
I'm basically not interested in limiting our pool of candidates. While I see the point of people who want us to do this, throughout industry and academia, there's interims all the time who both do and do not get hired for the permanent position. In this case, who applies to the permanent superintendent position is confidential. And anyone should really assume in a district as large as ours, we might have multiple internal candidates for this position. So I would never recommend barring internal candidates from applying, because I would view their AB experience as a positive. And in a way, the interim really gets tested, so it could possibly be looked at almost better. So I agree it's complicated, but I think I really just don't want to limit us.
I agree with what Christina said. I mean, just what you said, Deanne, just now. Like, what if someone that we're not anticipating decides to apply for this interim position, and it's just a matter of I don't know, bad luck that they didn't apply for another position somewhere else, and maybe they're really awesome. I mean, I have never been through a superintendent search. I wasn't on the principal search committee at Blanchard, but I certainly went to all the forums and things like that, and I think it's really wrong of us to assume that an internal candidate is going to be the best, or isn't going to be the best, or will affect who applies, or whatever else. I mean, that's, you know, it happens all the time that the internal candidate doesn't get it, because someone else comes in and it's unexpected, and I would hate to see us limit our search as well.
I agree. Well, actually, this brings up a question in my mind, because I'm talking about a process for choosing an interim that's pretty fast track, and we're not hiring an outside company to do the 8x10 color glossy photographs. We're and I'm not sure. I'm not, you know, speaking for a foregone conclusion of the subcommittee, but you know, our hope is to get someone very qualified very quickly, but it's just not the same process as looking for a permanent superintendent, if I may. That's why I think it's, you know, if we do find a candidate who is interested in the permanent position, I'm not interested in limiting their option to do that.
Alan Itchum. So there's a large universe of potential permanent superintendents. And the idea that we're going to pick one person to be the interim, and therefore that one person out of the dozens, hundreds, or thousands of potential candidates will be excluded, doesn't make a lot of sense. If there is a young person who wants to lead the AB school system, then they can apply in October or November with everybody else, and let them apply. The interim position is a short-term, 1 year or a little less, and the reason you don't let them apply for the permanent position is because they have an inside track as the leader. It's not that they're an employee or an insider or someone who's currently employed. They may be an external person that we hire. But once they become the interim superintendent, they have the inside track, and it's going to be perceived as being biased. Even if it isn't, it will have that appearance. So I strongly urge you to not allow interim candidates to be candidates for the permanent position, and that will become known. In fact, it should be stated on the materials that the interim superintendent is not going to be applying. That should be a condition of accepting the position. And this way, everyone who applies is starting off at an equal footing. And that will give us a much better pool of potential superintendent candidates, permanent candidates, because people will not be discouraged from applying because they don't think that the acting or the interim superintendent, you know, is already going to be throwing their hat in the ring. So I strongly urge you to follow what we recommended, which is that the interim shall not be a candidate for the permanent. Thank you.
Hi, Steve Ballard from Boxborough. I wanted to apologize for comments that I made last time. I did to some people already. But I wanted to just say something without naming a name. I got a tip, and I sent a message to Mary Brolin and to Amy about this, and I know that she's withholding that information until the next steps. But given what I've heard about the old versus retired, and local versus not here, external versus internal, and what we had requested in our letter, that we have this rule, and then also taking into account the comments I heard Bridget make about, well, we just need someone. They don't necessarily have to know our school system that well. They need to take over these tasks if they can hit the ground running. The person, I'm going to describe this person to just basically say, I think, you know, to underline what Alan said and some other people here said, that there are people, there's someone that I was told by someone that I work with in a nonprofit, about this person. High accolades for this person. Just finished a one-year interim in July 1st. He finished, well, it's a he. And he did another interim the year before that in another school system, and then before that had an experience as an assistant superintendent in a very large, high-performing district, overseeing many, many elementary school principals and a building project. So, and he wants to, it's also an older person, retired, sort of retired, kind of working toward doing another interim. So I'm hoping that that will go to the subcommittee with, hopefully there are other people like him out there that you can consider. But maybe I would suggest, I would just, or ask, if you could consider, given that you need to move fast, that you maybe not decide, you can just say, well, we prefer an external to an internal, we prefer this to that, and then leave it open. And then look at what candidates you have and see if you cannot find someone right away who fits as many of the conditions that all of you have mentioned. That's my point.
Thank you, thank you. And I will pass that name on to the group. Thanks. Any other thoughts from the committee?
I think it may end up that this issue is moot, depending on who we come up with, so I don't want to get too bogged down in it. It's just that my opinion stands. I've heard the sentiment, but I would prefer to leave it open.
Is there any disagreement? I'm not seeing any, so if the committee is comfortable, I'm just going to turn over the charge of coming up with the criteria and doing the work, and then coming back to us at a later date with your recommendations.
I just wonder if we can put some sort of time frame on it. If we don't have someone that the committee is comfortable recommending by whatever date this committee is comfortable with, we will come back together and have another conversation.
Well, how about if the committee reports back at our next meeting, and just, no pressure, of course, no pressure, but it's the 22nd, so it's 9 days. So that doesn't give you a whole lot of time to get together between now and then, but, and of course, everything has to be posted and all of that.
No, I'm just, logistics
Yeah.
are flying through my head, but I agree with you that we need to move fast. So yeah, let's see if we can do that for the 22nd then.
Then you report back either way. Either you've made progress or you haven't, so, again, no pressure.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to item number 9, and that is the permanent superintendent search. And we need to talk, there's some materials in your packet, I guess, from the previous search. So we need to discuss a timeline. We can review the previous timeline, and, well, we'll stop there for now. Yeah, Diane.
So I'm just wondering if some of the committee members who've been through this before and have more knowledge about the timing and when is the best time to really launch this could weigh in.
You want to take it?
So that's Christina, you and I guess. We've been through this before. So my recollection is that things really start opening up for candidates in the late fall, like the November, December timeframe. The last two, I can't remember the timeline for the search before the last one, but the last one I know we were taking applications, I think in November, December. I know we've got it in our packet, but I didn't memorize it before the meeting. Yeah, the deadline was right at the beginning of December, and I think we moved that back from the previous search, which had the deadline, I think, maybe in January. And we did that on purpose to try to cast a broader net. But there was a lot of work that led up to that process. So formulating the committee, putting a schedule together, figuring out how the committee was going to work. I know Andrew Shen was a huge resource on the administrative side of keeping things running. We interviewed, I think, 3 search firms the last time, so this committee will need to decide whether we want to use a search firm again, and if we do, we'll have to reach out to search firms and have them come in. So there's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of candidates, but I want to say it's like November is a hot month for candidates. So I would think that we should be able to do some of the administrative stuff before September. I get Deanne's concern about having people, check out for the summer and maybe not be interested, so we can figure out if we want to reach out before then or after. There are a lot of people, obviously, here tonight who are very interested in this, so I would suspect that the interest is going to remain high over the next few months, but I guess we'll find out once we decide.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that all of the things that we're referring to are all posted in our under the agenda on the website, so you can take a look at the previous search materials for the public. More of your thoughts on when do you want to get, what do you want to do, I guess is what I'm asking. This is we're starting from scratch here. Starting from scratch here. I'm really having a hard time with this one. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
And this is for the permanent search.
Yeah.
Search for the permanent. I think we have kind of a luxury of time here. And we're talking about this now, and the process really doesn't need to start until September. So I think that we might kind of get our ducks in a start thinking about getting our ducks in a row. But I don't feel the same urgency for the permanent position that I do for the interim. So this timeline looks like it was a reasonable timeline. I only served at the end of that, doing the site visits. But I think it worked out pretty well. So I think that the timing is, if we form the committee sometime in September, people are back from vacation, people are ready to, to get focused on it.
Well, I guess oh, go ahead, Christina.
If I look back to, not the last search, but the prior one, we collected applications until January 9th, 2009. And last time they had to be submitted by December 3rd. So we did move everything a month earlier. What was very tricky last time, I don't know if you'll remember, but was the overlap with budget season, and we actually had 2 Saturdays in a row of all-day budget meeting and all-day superintendent interviews, the final interviews. So what I would say is there might be some in-between timing that might work a little bit better for us. And it's not necessarily an individual workload issue like I did allude to the last time we were talking about this in the auditorium. But it's really, it's an issue that affects everybody, and all of the committee, the community, the staff, and everybody is working on this issue and the budget issue. So I think I think Budget Saturday and all that goes up to that is set, and I don't think we should consider moving that. But I think we might consider moving this process to have those final interviews perhaps a month after Budget Saturday. Because even though the budget season work is still fairly intense from Budget Saturday until town meeting votes happen, I think that would be better for us than having them really tight next to each other. And it also gets us through the building project votes in early December. So all of this work will happen, but I'm meaning these big final days that involve a huge number of people should not be 1 week apart.
I hear what you're saying. I know it's crazy. I guess the other side of that is then you run the risk of candidates accepting other offers if there are finalists that are finalists in other districts, presumably as well as ours. So I think once we get a little bit closer, we'll probably have to balance those things out. And if we end up hiring a search firm, they may have some guidance around that too that could be helpful, but it's definitely going to be a balancing issue. I remember that now that you brought it up from last time.
And I remember the budget, getting the budget, being focused on the superintendent and getting kind of blindsided by a budget, and that was not fun either. So, you know, that's the hard part, is that I don't want to be blindsided by a budget and come into you know, Budget Saturday without having a preview of what it is we're voting on. So, you know, we got to keep our eye on that process. But I agree with Christina that got to be very problematic, and I remember that. So yeah, yeah, it is a balancing act. I don't know what the answer is, but I know I don't want to do that again.
Is it possible to assemble the committee now, or to start receiving application in the summer? Applications for the search committee from members of the public? Or is that asking too much?
What do you think? I mean, we could do, yeah.
I don't mind getting a committee together because there are a number of steps that we would need to organize, and that, you know, again, it would probably be a good thing to do that sooner rather than later. So we're not trying to, you know, build the plane while we're flying it kind of thing. So I don't mind establishing a committee now, but it might not be useful to start getting resumes now.
I agree with Paul. I don't mean now like this week or next week. I mean now maybe in 3 to 4 weeks to start to pull the committee together. I realize it's over the summer, but I think we have this letter from a group of community members with some very specific requests, which if we are going to honor or work towards trying to honor, will require a significant amount of work from the process the last time. Not all of them. What was I thinking specifically? Some policy development, the way criteria are developed. There was something else, I can't find it maybe because the print is so small. But anyway, I think we'll need a little extra time than we did for the last search. So to do that pre-work over the summer makes sense. So I think, I don't know that we need to vote tonight on who wants to be on that committee, although if people want to do that, that's fine. But I think the intention is it will take us longer than it did last time.
I would like to echo Maya as what I, talked about before. I would like to echo Maya, and also I think Paul has the same thought. Christina may think we can start 3 to 4 weeks. I think we may start in maybe 2 weeks, after 2 weeks. And especially we heard from the public, and there are many, many community members. They probably have the representative to join the whole search team, and people need to get together to, read or study whatever the guideline before and form the really the new task. I think the committee should, that's what I always feel. This is really, really important. Thank you.
According to the timeline of what was done last time, there's a couple weeks between when the school committee discussed a search committee profile, which I think is an important step. And, I know that you're saying a couple weeks, and Christina said a couple more weeks, but we would have to have a meeting, I would think, of the school committee to decide, assuming we're not deciding that tonight, what the search committee profile would look like. There is a group of interested parents, I know, I read that letter, but the risk of getting their ire, they have interests, and there may be people on the committee that have different interests in terms of what they're looking for a superintendent, but I just think that, the committee profile will end up having to be balanced, and so we will need time to come up with those, I guess, qualifications or whatever, and then have people submit their interest.
Yeah, so those are, this is one thing, coming up with the the criteria, and if we're going to get the search, an outside company to help with the search, these are administrative pieces that, we can do sooner rather than later. Those aren't so dependent on timeline. That's why I think putting the committee together for a permanent superintendent search in the next few weeks, next month, it sounds like it gives them time to then do those administrative pieces, so that by the time October, November, December come, we've got everything together.
I just wanted to clarify. I just meant that it said that, I don't disagree with you at all about the administrative part, but in terms of putting together that committee, that search committee, there's a timeline piece in the beginning of this where we, as a school committee, decide on a search committee profile and then ask people to.
And I would say, I do think that's an important discussion that we have as a committee before we actually invite people to be on that search committee.
So I was just going to say, so I think we need to figure out how we want to go about doing that, whether we want to try to talk about that tonight, or whether we want to have a meeting devoted to talking specifically about the permanent search. Maybe that's tonight. Maybe we go down that road tonight, but I think the first step is figuring out what we think is the right approach for a search committee, the makeup of the search committee. And then we look for people who want to be on that committee. So that's the way I see it, step one and step two.
Sorry. Hi, Narcy Woods. I have a question from someone who couldn't be here tonight, and I'm going to add a little bit of my own question to it. Do we have any idea on what the possible financial impact might be to the budget for going through the interim process and or also the permanent superintendent search process as well, taking into account what it cost last time for the search, and how we're going to accommodate those funds out of the existing budget that was already voted in?
Okay, so we do have, so the last search, when we hired the search firm, cost about $20,000. And we do have room in the budget that we can do that. And then I think we need to determine, what did you, I mean, what we're going to pay an interim.
So I think we'll need to look at what the going salaries are right now, and we'll need help to do that. We'll have to reach out to probably MASC and get some guidance in terms of what's out there for what we would be paying. We also are looking carefully at this year's budget, meaning the budget ending 2017, to see, and we mentioned this at our last meeting, to see what items in the budget for next year can be paid out of funds this year, because we did have some accounts that were favorable this year, and there will be more of a report on that at the next school committee meeting. So we're looking to see what we can move ahead in terms of expenses to free up some money in next year's budget to help pay for these things.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Ripley Martin from Acton. I'm looking at the conversation you're having right now about how to set up committees and how to plan for the fall and whether to start now or start in the fall. And I'm looking forward 5 months to a period of time where, it sounds like, between last session and this session, in a period of about 2.5 weeks, the people around this table are going to decide how to deploy something like 75% of all of our tax bills in the entire town through the school budget, a fairly considerable capital plan that needs to go in front of a town meeting, and to interview the person who's going to be arguably the most important person in the entire town. So I ask you to look at that deadline in what sounds like a very busy November, and the subsequent steps that need to happen throughout 2018 to make sure that that capital plan stays on track. Starting a new superintendent who then needs to be able to step into that environment, and the number of things that need to happen such that you can hit the ground running in September to start accepting applications as soon as possible, recognizing that there is, good, bad, or indifferent, a bit of a externalizable cloud over this entire process with respect to communication in the community. So I implore you to consider starting the process as soon as humanly possible, such that you are able to think through all of those steps that need to happen, not just in the search process itself, but the interdependencies that it creates with the other things that we're trying to get done as a community. Thank you.
Hi, Steve Ballard again. I wanted to actually say, Mr. Martin, I actually already moved and someone seconded on our Facebook page to have him be on the search committee. As for what I'm here for now is, on Christina's point about we appreciate those of us who worked on that letter and have been studying you guys a lot and their history. You appreciate the sentiment that you want to take some time and make sure that you address our concerns. It might take some time. But I would echo what Mr. Martin just said and Eileen said about why can't we start right away. And if the concern is that you want to meet our request, I was very happy sitting over there when I heard who was going to be on the subcommittee, because I happen to know who was on the search committee last time. And it wasn't Paul or Dean or Diane or Eileen or Tessa. And so if we have 3 school committee people on this next search committee like we did last time, we already have 5 volunteered for the subcommittee who are fresh voices, which is what we wanted. So there's no danger of having this subcommittee take on the additional task, if they're willing, to also begin the process of doing some of the things that we asked that we thought, actually, ideally, we know we have a year process rather than a half year. You're not going to, if you start in the fall, okay, that's where you're really going to start on the permanent process. People are away on the summer, you have the summer retreat, but maybe now is the time when you can do some of that work, in addition to finding an interim, to lay the groundwork, to talk about those issues. And if you have among those 5 of you on the subcommittee, the potential 3 people are going to be on the search committee, among those 5 of you, I don't want to speak for anyone, I'm getting in trouble for speaking for people, but it's certainly consistent with what we requested, to have those 5 people both on this temporary committee for the interim and the permanent committee. So I'm just saying, I would echo what Mr. Martin said and Eileen said, and those of you also agree, why don't we start now? if, you know, if it's not going to start in earnest until the fall, you can at least lay the groundwork, maybe have, you know, your summer retreat, talk about philosophy, come back and have some kind of meetings to decide what your criteria will be. And then in the fall, you know, you'll be in good position to start the process to get someone by July of next year. Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I mean, I served on the last search, and from hearing that, I feel obliged to recuse myself from this process, so
I think that there's some real, I'll let Christina, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Actually, Paul, you weren't on the search committee, though. You just went to the very, you came to do the site visits and not even all of them. So the site visit process was something that I ran, and I went to all 3. So we had consistency, but then different school committee members attended those site visits. So you did come with me and with Maria Nealon to Sharon. Out in Quabog was me and Mary and I don't remember. And he. I didn't do any site visits. No. So I'd have to look at my notes. But anyway, so Paul, you were not on the whole search committee. So I think that whether or not you want to recuse yourself is up to you. But the list of who was on the search committee is in our packet. I think the issue for the 5 people who have offered to be on the subcommittee to choose the interim is, do you want to take on the permanent search as well? Do you want to just have it all be one group doing the process?
I actually want to respond to the earlier question. I don't understand why we would want to preclude anyone from being on any committee. The portion of that process that I did serve on, I was very proud of all the other members who were on it. So I have no problem serving with anyone else. And I'm not sure I understand why we could prevent one member from not being on it or being on it. I don't understand that, and I just think it's, first of all, we'd lose some very good talent, and that would be a shame. So, you know, my problem is that in October, November, I get sucked into a rabbit hole for work. I'm helping with the Salem Harbor construction, and they're going to be commissioning at that point, and I need to be available 24/7 for that, for basically those months. So that's going to be real tough for me.
Does anyone else want to follow up with that question? Or I think it's premature to have you commit now to being on the permanent search committee. I think that's something that everyone needs to think about and really decide what level of time commitment you can give. Go ahead, Maya.
I was just going to ask, are we deciding now about the permanent committee? Because I understood us to be selecting a subcommittee for the interim, and that I didn't understand there'd be an automatic rollover into the permanent. So
there is not an automatic rollover, and we are not.
So that's good to clarify. And are we choosing to select a permanent committee today as well, or?
No.
That was just a request from Mr. Ballard. I don't think we have to decide now, but I just said he asked us, and they want fresh voices. Those were the words.
And I'll just add that I prefer to wait for the summer workshop, because that's when we talk about all of the different subcommittees and all of the different projects we're thinking of launching in addition to the subcommittees. So I do think it's a little premature, but I do hear the public, and we'll absolutely consider everything that they say, and our own needs and interests as well.
actually, you know, having said what I've said and heard what I've heard, I view this also as an opportunity that we should take the public up on. I mean, if they're ready to, you know, put their shoulder to this work, I don't want to say no to that. So if there's some things that can be done that don't need to wait for a subcommittee for the permanent search, if the public would be willing to vet search companies and recommend one to us, so we don't have to form a subcommittee to do that. You know, there are a lot of things that can happen organically that don't require the committee to actually take an action. So I want to take advantage of that enthusiasm, and let's bring the public in as much as they're willing to contribute.
So I echo that, Paul. I think last time we had 15 people on the search committee. I don't plan on volunteering for that this time. I chaired it last time. I was on it the time before. I don't plan on doing that again because I'm coming off the school committee at the end of my term anyway. But I'm happy to help out in whatever way I can. But people need to understand when they're thinking about this, the time commitment. There are meetings that are held that last 5 or 6 hours routinely for weeks on end, you know, a couple of days a week when you're going through stacks of applicants. I mean, it's a hefty workload, so people need to understand the requirement, and you can't miss meetings. People need to be there, and you also have to follow the rules that the committee sets up. So it's a really big commitment. I just put that out there for the public so people can understand what a commitment it is. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, I think we need to be careful, though, about farming out some of the jobs to the public, because while it's wonderful to have the engagement that we have now, one of our 3 primary jobs is to hire the superintendent. So we need to make sure that we're fulfilling our requirements as well. So I just want us to be careful about that. Budget, policy, superintendent. Those are our 3 main jobs.
Thank you. Christine Marlowe, Boxborough. Thank you all for all the hard work you've been doing. I just have some clarification that I need so I can understand this whole process. And Christine, I think you have a lot of the answers. And you said that, and you too, that the 2 superintendents ago, you left the window open till January 9th. And then for Dr. Brand, you closed it around December 9th or 4th. And I'm just wondering, like, was the difference, the number of resumes, different from the older one versus when we made it a shorter window? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that. I remember how many applicants we got last time, but that's confidential.
Okay.
And so I assume it's confidential from the first one as well.
Okay. So.
Or actually, you know what? I don't know that the number is not confidential. Okay. It's the people who are. I'm sorry.
So, but we don't know, like, the time before how many we had, or do you have like a feel? Okay.
I think it was similar, but I couldn't swear to that. I'm not 100% sure.
And can you please clarify why we made the change? Was it the budgets? Was it the timing was better to end it in December? I'm just thinking about the time of year that is. We've got Thanksgiving, we've got the holidays, the winter holidays, so it's, from a layman's perspective, it seems like it makes more sense to keep it open till January, but obviously there was a good reason, so I just would like to understand that.
My recollection from the last search was that we moved it back so that it ended earlier because we didn't want to run into the holiday season. And I think we were thinking that because of the notice period that superintendents typically have to give when they're giving notice that they're going to leave the district, that had an impact on when we wanted to finish up our process and have our 3 finalists. So that's my recollection. I think we thought we'd get a broader group of applicants by moving it back, and it wouldn't bump into our budget season as much, too.
Okay.
So it was a combination of things.
Thanks. Wait, how early, I know you said that the best season is like in November, but how early can we put out the ad for the applicants? Because it feels like, it may be like at beginning of October, and you just get a larger window. Does that make sense? And if, that would be great.
I don't think there's a firm date on when you can. I think it's basically when you're ready and when we think it makes sense to advertise. I suppose, like in any job search, if a job's open or advertised for a really long period of time, maybe it gets a little bit stale. But, that's not to say that if you didn't get a good slate of candidates, you couldn't extend the window longer, too. So I don't think there's a rule around it.
And when did you start? When did the application process start? Like, when could they send out resumes?
I think it was about a month that we had it open, but we've got the timeline here. Just bear with me a second.
Sorry.
I think it was just after Thanksgiving that we started advertising. No, that's not right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. We did community forums, blah, blah, blah. Advertisement was posted October 22nd, and the deadline was December 3rd.
Okay.
So it was over a month, just over a month.
Thank you.
Hello, Adam Kenny, Acton. So I appreciate how thoughtful the committee is being with this whole process. I think as you all have discussed and as the community has expressed previously, I think this is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest decision we have over the next year, is finding the right leader for the next, hopefully, much longer than 3 years. That said, I want to echo the sentiment that I think was stated earlier, and that's just that I think we need to show a heck of a lot more urgency in getting this off the ground. It would be one thing if we were sitting here tonight and we knew exactly what was before us, and the only conversation was about when do we get resumes. And if that was September, then fine, we can have our plan, put it on the shelf for 3 months, and get back to it. But we, not to be too blunt, don't seem to really have much of a clue as to what our plan is. And so I think we need to very aggressively figure out who are the right leaders from this group and the community that can start putting that plan together and aggressively map out the next 4 months so that when September comes, we're not like the high school student who thought they had 2 weeks to study for a test and we're cramming for the exam at the last minute. I'm very worried that that's where we're going to be in a few months, and with everything else that Rip mentioned earlier, that's going to set us up for a lot of failures if we get there. So we just ask that we show more urgency in trying to pull that plan together.
Thank you. I'm Ruth Bendig from Acton. And this is actually all part of the same piece, I think. Oops, sorry. I'm wondering if when you're looking for the interim superintendent, if part of that person's charge, especially if I think it's valuable to bring in someone from outside, because we have a lot of moving parts that need to come together in a very short period of time over the summer and fall. And being inside the system, you sort of, the tendency, I think, is to get hung up on, well, this is the way it is. This is what we have to work around because these are our givens. And someone who comes in from outside, especially if that person has a lot of experience in other districts, which speaks to hiring a retired or more experienced superintendent for this position, isn't necessarily wedded to, well, we only have this option. And so as we're putting all of these things together, I think that the interim, one of their charges could be to help the community and help you all figure out exactly what you are looking for in the next superintendent by helping streamline the process of what we need to do, how do these parts move together, which are the parts that really do need to be looked at for radical change, which are integral to the district and need to stay and be worked around. So I would hope that that could be part of the charge of the interim, to work with you. If we could have that person on board to go with you to your workshop, that would be great, because I think that would be a very good place for that person to start getting a feel for the district and maybe bringing in some fresh perspective. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I've heard a lot of different things, and I'm kind of at a loss here. So I guess I'm looking for some guidance from the school committee on what do you want to pursue tonight? What do you want to think, where do you want to go? Because, you know, it's a lot to think about, and it's a lot to tackle this evening, but, you know, if that's what we should do, then then maybe we should start talking about doing that.
I think if what I'm hearing from the community and some school committee members is that we need to start the process of at least putting the search committee together, then the first thing that we have to discuss is what does the search committee look like and what do we want that search committee to look like? I guess functionally and philosophically.
And I was just planning on calling the other four on Saturday.
But we're talking about the permanent.
Oh, the permanent, yeah, well, so I had put some thought together for this meeting with respect to interim. I hadn't put any thought for me personally on the permanent, so I'm kind of not ready to talk about that yet.
I wasn't speaking to that. I guess what I was hearing from the community members that got up was that they were very anxious for us to start that process for the permanent superintendent. And if we're going to start the process for this permanent superintendent, though not the application process, but the laying the groundwork, that we have to have a search committee for that first. I agree with you. I wasn't like rolling my participation in the interim committee into the permanent committee either, just yet. But that's more what I was hearing and was responding to.
I'm okay with responding to the urgency. I don't know that you know, setting up the subcommittee for the permanent search needs to happen tonight. If that's the urgency that's being required, I'm not sure I'm ready to commit to it. So I think I'd prefer to have some time to think about, you know, the process and whether I want to be a part of that process or not. But if we were going to make that decision for the sake of urgency tonight, I can't be a part of that process.
I didn't mean choosing the people. I meant setting up a guidelines or whatever tonight, because it sounds like from the timeline last time that the school committee set up guidelines for that search committee of what they, like it was listed. I'll tell you what I'm referring to. So it says, on 9/19, the school committee meeting discussed process and timeline, voted to hire a search firm, and agreed on a search committee profile. Search committee volunteers were invited to submit letters of interest by October 1st. So that's what I was referring to, that if we, instead of having another meeting where we just discussed what the parameters were for a search committee, not deciding school committee members tonight or community members tonight or any of that, just setting up the parameters of what we wanted in a search committee.
It might be helpful to at least go through the last search committee and what the makeup was, and compare. I took notes from this community letter with their requests for what the search committee looks like. We had 2 community members, 3 professional staff, 2 school principals, 1 central office staff, 3 school committee members, and 3 school parents. The group who wrote us the letter today wants nobody on the search committee who has ever served on one before. They want more than 50% AB community members without any current or prior affiliation with the district. And they would like the search committee to be chaired or vice chaired from an AB community member without any affiliation. And they would like us to hire a different consulting firm. than we did last time. So those are really just two sets of data points. I don't know if we want to think about merging them. What would that look like as a group? And are there other things that would be important? Do we feel it's important to have Finance Committee participation on this, or some other town board? I don't know.
Did you
So-
happen to summarize how that all lines up?
I'll work on that while you guys keep talking.
So I just sort of took a stab. We had 15 people on the committee last time, and aside from the who's affiliated with what, we had some professional staff, some principals. We had 3 school parents, so we could certainly add, I think it's important to have professional staff on the committee. These are people who know the district, who understand the district, who have a lens to help look at resumes, gauge experience, whether it's educational, central office, whatever. So I think it's important to have professional staff and principals on the committee personally. I'm completely on board with adding more school parents. I think that's great. The only issue that, the upside is it's terrific to have more voices. The downside is then instead of 15 people, you might have 25 people, and from an administrative standpoint, it's really difficult to get 25 people in a room to do this kind of job. That being said, it's great. I think it's a great idea. There were 3 school committee members on the committee last time. This is our primary job, hiring the superintendent, so, and at that point, we weren't regionalized yet either, right? Yeah, 2013. So we have a larger school committee now, so we need to take that into consideration, whatever that means. So we had 2 principals. Andrew Shen, the principal at the junior high, was one of them, and from an administrative standpoint, he really helped to keep track of the process. He took minutes of the meetings, he got the agendas out, he really worked very closely with me in chairing as I was chairing the committee, so that was terrific. I don't know, who will want to step up to help with that, but that's a really important role to have somebody who's good with those details to take that on. So, if we added 5 more school parents, so that would mean 8 parents, and you have 2 other community members, so that's 10, right? So that's 10 people, and now all of a sudden we've gone up to, 25, 26 people, so it's almost half. I don't know. It's a lot of people to manage.
I mean, I agree with Bridget. First, it needs to be explained to people how many meetings, because it was a significant number of meetings during the day, and a significant amount of time that this committee spent. The more people that you have, the more restriction you're going to have on dates to get all those people together. And I think that that's why we came up with the number, because I think we discussed that, and we were trying to not make it so large that we were impeding ourselves from getting through the process. On this sheet, it's a third community members, right? I mean, you have 15, and you have 5 that were, whether parents or community members. And I do think it's vital, we're hiring somebody, and you have to have a good amount of people on the committee that know what to look for, that either work in the district and know the leadership that they need, that know administratively what's required. I guess I like the number of a third of community members, just because I think it was a nice balance, and maybe we do increase the committee. But I wouldn't, like with any job, you don't hire, you need people with the interaction, because everyone looks from the outside and they see what they want, but it's the people who are on the inside that know what they need, and know what they need to get the district working the best way possible. So I I remember being, on the school committee when we defined this number, and I remember having discussions, we can go back to the minutes, about larger, smaller, and I think this is larger than we had for Dr. Mills, isn't it?
I really can't remember.
Maybe
I'd
we
have
can
to
pull
dig
that
through
back.
records to look, I don't
But,
know.
and again, we're regionalized, so I do think, we can have more, but the more people that you have, you're just gonna really struggle with the number of meetings that have to be scheduled. And I would hate our process to be slowed down because we can't get everybody together. And it doesn't make sense to have a meeting if you don't have everybody there, right? Because at one point, you just have to start having meetings if you can't get agreed upon dates. So that's just where I stand.
Can I say one more thing? So the other thing that was part of our process the last time, which I thought was really important, and I really liked it, and it added a lot to the process. The search committee orchestrated an online survey for the public for input for the search and the school committees to look at. I thought that was really important. We also, and this is before the process, before any of the interviews happened, et cetera. We also had 2 public forums, one held in Boxborough and one held in Acton, to have the public have the opportunity to come, meet with it was a representative of the search committee, and basically tell them what was important to the community in looking for a superintendent. And my recollection, I don't think I went to any of those. I think it was the search committee running it. I think I went to one to make sure the room was set up, and then I left. But it was very much focused around community input and community involvement. So I don't know if people in the community remember that, but that was a really important part of our process the last time, and I'd like to see that happen again. So sitting on the committee is one opportunity to be involved, but the other opportunity is to give your input during that part of the process, which you don't have to attend, 15 meetings to do that. So I think we should definitely keep that as part of the process, and if 2 meetings isn't enough and we think we need to have a couple more, we can do that too. And then the search committee took all of the information that was gathered, summarized it and presented it back to the school committee to make sure that that was part of the process of evaluation going forward, so.
So did I hear one of the requests be that a member of the community be the chair? Is that? Or, so if that, first of all, my question is, would that still be a subcommittee of the committee? Is that appropriate, or I mean, I don't mind the idea. I'm just wondering if that's something that we can do as a committee.
I don't know, Beth, can you respond? Beth, can you speak to that? No. So this is our charge as a committee. We have 3 things that we are supposed to do, and one of them is hiring of the superintendent. So to then say that we are going to abdicate that responsibility I do not think is the right thing to do. It is very important. This is the reason that you have a school committee. This is what the state has established. This is the charge from the state of what the school committee's responsibilities are. So I don't see how not having a school committee person chair that would be a good idea.
What about a vice chair from the community?
We can have a conversation about that. I don't have a problem with that.
I would think that might be up to whoever decides to chair, and if they are comfortable and think it would be helpful to have a co-chair. but I agree with Amy. I don't think we should outsource the chair role to someone who's not on the school committee.
I think we discussed a lot already. I forgot. Yeah. I think I agree with Bridget. I forgot what, but we're discussing the whole search committee member, right now. So yeah, I think Deanne mentioned that too. For me, I really think we need large school parents, committee members, and join the force. However, just like Deanne said, if we involved more people, we probably have less chance to get together because people have tight schedule, commitment, this and that. But here's a question for me is, how can we establish a channel to really connect, contact with the community, and we gather whatever the step by step the community request or their hope or what they want, as part of us, and we are school committee member, we are the parents, and we are the community member too. So is there some effective way for whatever this committee communicate with the public at large? That's, that's really, I think if we have a very large member of this whole committee, it will not have the very efficient way to meet together. But however, this is so very important. Either maybe we can have an outreach group or whatever, send out whatever the meeting material, or maybe the summary every time after the meeting. But what my suggestion is, how can we establish a way to really effectively communicate with the community at large? Wow.
So I think that's a great thing for the outreach subcommittee to really kind of try to get a handle on. And I know you're on the outreach, and during the summer workshop, we'll talk about different people will volunteer for different subcommittees. But I think that's a great charge for the outreach subcommittee.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing aligns with a philosophy called open government, and I know I've talked about, some of you know that I've talked about this before, and what it means is that, so the traditional way to do this would just be to invite some community members onto our committee, and we kind of run the show, and they get the information from us. So we are disseminators of information to the community. And so what open government does is open channels, and I don't know what that looks like because having never gone through this process before, but on every step there's some meaningful role for community members that is meaningful to them to move this process along. And again, I don't know what that looks like, but this is, I think this search isn't going to look like the conventional search as we search for ways to widen our net, or cast a wider net. I don't know how to quite say this in a way that really captures what I mean. But what I really would like at the end of the day is for the community and us and all the stakeholders to feel like they have made a meaningful contribution to this process.
I also think that we should just acknowledge aloud repeatedly that this is a huge time commitment, and then assume that the people who sign up to do this have, get a realistic, perspective on the expectations, and then join You know, I mean, I don't know what this looks like. I wasn't on a previous search committee, but I imagine a lot of these are daytime meetings because of the staff. So, you know, a lot of parents and community members know their schedule, and they know that they're available during the days. You know, their kids are at school, or, you know, they're retired. People know their schedules, and I just think it behooves us to try to fold in more people, having, again, stated clearly what the requirements are. I certainly know that as school committee members, we think hard about which committees we can sit on based on schedules, and some of us can do more than others. So everybody goes into this, you know, without naivete about what the demands are. It should work out. It's, you know, it's not a reason not to let people get involved.
So I guess I would like to hear, hearing from, to move this along a little bit, are you prepared to vote or to suggest that we follow the same guidelines in terms of makeup of the search committee? Or would you like more time to think about the search committee? Or I guess, do you want to go a totally different way?
You know, having been on it, so I already stated, I did like the makeup, but again, now we're regionalized, so I do agree probably should increase it, but not by too much. But what I think might help is if we gather some information, because we do have the luxury of time at least now, because we started this in September last time. Other schools have recently gone through superintendent searches. It would be nice to see what their committee makeups were, just to at least, you know, it's just food for thought, just to get some other input to see where they stood, you know, in the process. And we can even, you know, do a little outreach and ask them what was good, what was bad in their process. But coming back to the June 22nd meeting with a little bit more information about what their committees looked like. But again, I like Maya said, I know people come in and they know what their commitment is, but we've seen in the past the larger groups that you have. I mean, this timeline gets very tight as it gets closer, right? So you're scheduling more meetings, you have interviews, you know, all of this stuff, and then the school committee members, we go out to site visits, and maybe that's where we get a few more community members, because it was just school committee members that did that, so maybe involve the community in that. But I do want to reiterate, there was an unbelievable amount of community involvement, I thought, in the last search, which was the forums, and it was kind of a bit like the open government, because after each step, there was community involvement. So we surveyed the community and held some forums to get the questions that we wanted, you know, or the criteria that we wanted, the qualifications we wanted in a superintendent. And then it was another meeting, but then once we had 3 candidates, then they all met the candidates as well, and they had input with that. So there was a great deal of community involvement and outreach, and we probably could do more, but I don't want to downplay the amount of community outreach and work that was done, because it was I thought, a very good, smooth process the last time.
So we have a very packed agenda on the June 22nd meeting. So if you want to go off, take a look, see how other hiring committees, how the composition of different hiring committees, then we can do that. But then when we come back to the June 22nd meeting, then we need to have a very brief and kind of a decisive vote at that point, or to say we are not going to do that. We are going to do it. We are going to have some kind of a decisive voice over the summertime. So we need to, if we do that, if we do postpone it to June 22nd, we need to tighten it up.
So just, I don't want to go on and on, but given the time, but just if you think outside of the box for a second, say we just identified a pool of interested members of the community, and it could be fairly large. They wouldn't have to go to every meeting. They wouldn't have to participate in every step of this process and move together as if they're one committee. We could deploy and engage as we encounter or as we have to deal with different components of the search. So just throwing that out there. I mean, we don't have to have like 25, 30 people moving through every step of the process. So, you know, perhaps we could consider what this would look like a little bit differently if we cast the net a little wider.
Having been a teacher in my previous life, and so coming at it from that perspective a little bit, I don't disagree with having more community involvement at all, although I tend to sit on Dan's bench over there and say that, you know, when there are, it's as evidenced by reading everything that I have read since I started on the committee about a month ago. You know, there is, having been a teacher, there's a lot of different understandings about what happens in schools, what happens at the district, and all of these other things. And some of those are based in fact, and some of those are based in feeling. And I think that the more people we involve at an intimate level, the more feelings are involved with that. And at the end of the day, I think we do have to remember that the makeup of the committee has to reflect, yes, the superintendent works for the district, and that includes the community, but the people that work for the superintendent, I think, have to be a very big voice on that search committee. And I think that the community voices are important, and I'm not dismissing them at all, but the people that, you know, are part of the district as staff members or sitting on the school committee or, you know, or in central office are the people that are really aware of what those qualifications are for a superintendent, what they're looking for in a person that they're going to work for. And so I just don't want to discount that. I think that the public voice is really important, and I hear what Diane's saying 100%, but it seems to me that, you know, to have a smaller committee, and I don't mean smaller than what we had before, but to increase it by too much, we will get bogged down in conversation about endless kind of things, which there's some value to that conversation, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to make a decision, and I don't know. That's my opinion.
I like what Diane and Tess both said, and I wonder if we could ask them as part of that subcommittee that's working on the interim to work on a preliminary search profile that might be a little bit different than what we've done in the past, but tries to take advantage of what the community is looking for, as well as the reality of what Tess talked about, getting a strong enough voice from the staff and the people who work with the superintendent. I think it might not look exactly like what we've done before. So if you five are willing to do that, I think that might put us in a better place next time we get together. And it just could be a draft. It doesn't have to be final, but I think to talk through it more than we can do now, I think we should really move on.
Are you five willing to do that? Paul? Diane?
I'd be willing to do that. It's just that the interim superintendent is serving a different role, so we'd be looking at two different profiles, I guess. So, you know, we can take a crack at it. So.
Hi, Bill Guthline. I was on the last search committee, and it was a very rewarding experience. But I did have some observations at the time, having never done a kind of a public search before. And, you know, I have to say I am in agreement that the search committee or screening committee, if you will, should be composed more of community, parents, and non-district employees than district employees. My count last time, I had 14. 6 were clearly district employees, and 1 person was listed as a parent, but it was also a district employee, I believe. So say 50-50 employees, non-employees. Now, I come from the private sector, and to say that, you know, 50% of the decision making would be made by, of the boss would be made by the, you know, the person that person be working for or further down the chain versus others, it would seem to be kind of unusual. And I kind of think of these things as kind of stakeholders. You know, employees are stakeholders. Their input is important, but the community who is hiring this person, who's really one of the few people that the school committee representing the community actually hires. The vast majority of the employee base is obviously hired by other staff members. So I really think that it's important that the community really has the overwhelming voice, which is not to diminish the fact that there's expertise you want to probe, that having representation, the expertise of employees and having their participation just generally that is part of a collective process is good, but the paramount concern to me would be to have that community input, that voice is paramount. And we do know sometimes the district staff and parents take different views. I mean, just in the recent survey on buildings, there was one option where the community said we like this approach or we don't like this approach, and the staff said they like another. So there's definitely going to be differences in the way the different groups approach this, and obviously one of the issues that we should be all thinking about as well. Having served on that committee, I keep thinking back, what should we have done differently? What it is, how is it that we came up with 3 candidates we all thought would be good. We chose one who we thought would be good, and then 3 years later we're having this departure that is very disruptive to the district, obviously, and particularly where we have some big agenda items. This building project is enormous, as we all know. So I think as part of the process of how we improve the search process, we really got to consider how do we avoid making the same mistake that we made before. And unfortunately, the public doesn't know what that mistake was, but hopefully there'll be disclosure down the roads. But thank you for.
So. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So I just had a quick. I'm okay with a larger committee, on the condition that kind of the meetings are mapped out, so that everybody knows what the process is, so that everybody can participate as they need to participate. I'm also appreciate, I think it was Diane's comment about, not every member of the committee has to be at every meeting. I think there might be some ways that roles could be played or whatever, but the thing that I'm thinking about now is that we really should start putting those pieces together and mapping out that process, and the sooner the better.
So the last time around, just as an example, we held 7 subcommittee meetings based on the calendar that's in the packet. I think that calendar's accurate. Each of the meetings lasted anywhere between 3 and 5 hours. Toward the end of the process, they were more toward the 5-hour part. And part of what was done, my recollection is the first meeting, we set up the schedule to make sure that everybody's schedule would jive with the meetings. So if pieces of this get parsed out so that not everybody needs to be at all the meetings, then, that obviously would affect it. But I think one of the considerations to that is when you get to the point in time when you're receiving the applications and everyone has a stack of 29 applications, which are, hefty documents of themselves to go through, then you need to figure out, well, does everybody need to look at all of those applications, and does everybody need to be involved in vetting and using whatever ranking or rating or evaluation process that the committee decides to use in evaluating which candidates are going to get moved forward. So, that's where the rubber really meets the road. So to think about splitting that so that not everyone is included in that phase, then you're losing the benefit of having more people involved and more voices involved. So I think, trying to figure out how people can be involved without having to be at every meeting is a great idea, but that's a balancing act then that you have to play, because it's important It was an important part of the process for me as a participant to hear the other points of view in the way people evaluated candidates. Because again, I sit as a school committee member, I don't look at it the same way as a parent might, or somebody who's got specific experience in the administration or in a school building. So that's just an important thing to weigh. But I hope that helps with, in terms of the number of meetings and the time commitment, at least based on the last process.
So Sharon Radha, Acton. So I have a suggestion about this. So when we actually requested that half of the people should be part of from the community, our intention was not to increase the number of the people. What I have been hearing is it might go to like 24, 25. So I'm just trying to understand the process. So as I understand, in 2013, we had 3 school committee members. Please correct me if I'm wrong. 3 administrators, 3 teachers, 3 parents, and 2 community members. And I'm not sure. I think there were 15 people. I might have been missing one. Is that correct?
We had 2 community members, we had 3 professional staff, we had 2 principals. So we had 2 community members, 3 professional staff, 2 principals, 1 administrator from central office, 3 school committee members, and 3 parents. So 5 were outside of the school operating.
Right,
So
right, okay.
It's 14, actually. We've been saying 15, but.
Yeah, so that's kind of the list what I have. So our suggestion was along the similar lines. We were not trying to reduce anything much, but just 1 or 2 numbers there, but the total count should be around that. So what we are suggesting, instead of 3 school committee members, maybe we can have 2 school committee members, each representing this is a suggestion. Just trying to keep the numbers. We don't want, of course, I definitely agree with Bridget when she said like 25 people, getting them and having a meeting plan will be difficult. So we suggested there were 2 principals, so there were 3 administrative staff. So can we have 2 principals and the 3rd person, I don't know what is the importance, and is that possible that that person cannot be part of it? So we will still have, yeah, so. That's the central office. So 2 principals are still involved in the process, 2 school committee members are involved in the process, 3 professional teachers involved in the process, and then here we actually have 7 people, and then we have 7 more people, and that is 4 parents, and we can have 3 Acton and 1 Boxborough and 3 community members. And that actually divides the ratio equally into 7 by 7, which is 7 people from the school community district and the central office and the teachers, and 7 from the community. So this is just a suggestion so that we still keep the numbers intact. And I definitely like the approach where it was you plan the meetings, and that's why we are more concerned, like we start the process up front now rather than waiting till September. So if there is a agenda we have to plan, if there is a meeting which has to go in, if we can at least plan ahead, so the people who are volunteering to be part of the search committee as from parents or the community members can have their schedule ready, and they get in with the full commitment that they are available and they can be available for the whole process. Thank you.
This will be quick. This is really just a clarification question for someone that hasn't been overly involved in these types of processes before. So we're talking a lot about the structure of the committee, or the subcommittee who's going to be involved in the selection process, but how does the actual chair typically get selected in this situation? I tend to agree with the comments earlier. It probably makes sense for a school committee member to be chair. I like the idea of a vice chair, but how does that actual selection happen? Because I think that's going to be really important here.
How does the selection for the
chair of the subcommittee? So aside from like who's qualified to be on the subcommittee.
Okay. Yep. Usually it's a vote by the school committee. It takes a vote and they vote that person chair. Yep.
So someone usually offers, like I'll offer to chair the interim search committee?
Typically, yes. Maya?
I appreciate the comments made earlier, and I'm all for folding in more community members. I don't think we can possibly reduce to 2 school committee members. I'm not even sure that would be legal. I really can't imagine how we might minimize school committee members.
Well, it is one of our primary charges, so I agree with you.
Sorry, if I could just make one last comment then. So all kind of laughing aside, I think it makes sense that the school committee would vote on that. I would just ask that we give as much thought to that decision as we give to how we structure the committee at large, and have ample discussion about who the chair is going to be for such an important process. I think it's fine for the interim for you to volunteer, and I appreciate that, Paul. I think you're going to do a great job, and I agree 100% in urgency, and so I like the way that you're already off and running with that. But with the permanent search, I think it's more critical to get the right leader, to find the right leader, and so would ask that we have a more thorough conversation when the time comes.
Okay, so I really feel like at this point we need to move on. From what I've heard, or where I'm thinking, is that we take this up in our summer workshop, exactly how we're going to structure this, and then to put a call out. Now, if you want to do a call out to volunteers from the community and so forth over the summer, we can do that. If you want to do it in the 1st of September, we can do that. I just don't really see how we can, and you can all disagree with me, I just don't see how we can do it tonight or by the June 22nd meeting.
I think it's completely possible, maybe for the outreach committee, to include in our outreach that we're going to be forming a search committee. We're going to be looking for community members who are interested, that it will involve a number of meetings in the fall, and give a broad time frame and a very broad sketch in what the time commitment might look like, to give people in the community the heads up if they're interested in serving. And maybe even at that point invite community members to send a note to the school committee chair or the secretary or whomever we decide to express interest, pending further details. And that way it's out there in the public, people can think about it, but they're not making a firm commitment at this point. Just an idea.
So can I get a sense from the committee on how you feel about that, what Bridget just said? Just nod yes or no. Okay, so Eileen, do you want to say something? Oh, okay. So then we have a couple of things. I'm going to move on. We have a couple of things that we have to vote tonight, just because of timing. So we have to vote in to employ Deputy Superintendent Marie Altieri as acting superintendent until an interim or permanent superintendent is employed, and that is so that it is effective on July the 1st, 2017. So can I have a motion? Yes.
Do we really need to vote this by definition of her job description?
Yes, we do. We actually do have to vote it.
Okay. I'll move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, and then the second piece is that we need to authorize the deputy superintendent or acting superintendent to approve and sign district purchase orders effective July 1st. And that's just another thing we have to vote on.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. So then can I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, see, I'm ready to go. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I know, I just want to make sure, item 7, we're all set on a vote with that? Did we take the vote?
We voted to form the subcommittee instead of voting each of those individually.
Okay. And then number 8? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Can I just confirm that this subcommittee is going to find an interim superintendent, find candidates, and report back on the 22nd. But we also have a charge to map out what a process might look like for the permanent superintendent search? Or did that get?
Go ahead, Christina.
That's not what I had asked. I had thought that you would work on the criteria for the new search committee. And I think having, was it Sushree, clarify what their expectations are numbers-wise is really helpful, because I think we're probably not far apart, and maybe a little bit of compromise and a quick discussion in that subcommittee. I think we could probably come up with something that's acceptable to everybody.
The profile of the search committee, so how many community members, how many school committee members, how many?
Okay, now I'm ready to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second? Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.